Before I start on the message, one of the things I was thinking about as I was praying earlier, so often we forget that when Yeshua went up, he said, I'll send you a comforter. And we think, oh yeah, the Ruach HaKodesh pour out on us, all this sort of thing. He said, no, I'm going to send you a comforter. And people think, oh, that's nice. There's a tapestry in the UK based on the Norman conquest of Britain. And on that tapestry, there's a picture of the Norman troops. And behind them are the king's personal bodyguard with spears at their backs. And people think, well, why have they got their spears at the back of their own troops? And the bottom line says, I've forgotten his name now. William comforting his troops. So comforting didn't mean the same thing then that comforting means now. What it basically meant was he was urging them to go forward, wanting them to move forward, wanting them to go forward and not retreat. And so consequently he made sure that they kept going forward because there's no way they wanted to go back. So sometimes the Ruach HaKodesh, yes, he's the comforter, but sometimes he's actually urging us to go forward and not look back, not retreat. And he was here and is here to replace Yahweh, to lead us and guide us and lead us into all truth. So this week, strangely enough, because it's Shavuot, I've called One Loaf. Because that's what we're meant to be, one loaf. We've all come from different harvest fields. We've all been ground in different places. We've all been prepared. But when at the end of the day we've all been mixed into dough and kneaded and risen and come to the place where we get baked into one loaf. You can't look at that loaf and think, oh yeah, I recognise that piece of grain in the corner, I know where that's from, and that little bit of grain just there, I know where that's from. It doesn't work that way. Once you allow that process to happen, you just become a new creation, you become one loaf. And the good news about being one loaf is loaves are meant to be eaten. It's no use being part of a loaf unless that loaf is offered to those that are hungry, that need nutrition spiritually. So, nothing new is happening these days. In the wilderness, people constantly complained about their hardships. Can't you see what's happening to me? And even the Gentiles that were with them, when it talks about a mixed company, it talks about those from Egypt that they'd married, that they'd been involved with, that these were not other Jewish people from Egypt. This was a mixed multitude. This is a group of people from Egypt. A lot of them would have been slaves from all over the Egyptian Empire. So they wouldn't just have been from Egypt. They would have been from all sorts of different places.
The Erev Rav, the mixed multitude.
Yeah. So the Gentiles with them became increasingly greedier for an easier life. How many times do we turn around and say, we'd like an easier life, please? We'll do it in Fiddler on the Roof. Lord, I know we're the chosen people, but can't you choose somebody else for a change? Israel was crying out for meat. I understand that. I understand that motivation. There was a devout carnivore. As they longingly looked back to the past and remembered the fish and the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions and the garlic in Egypt. And what were they crying out? We're withering away on a diet of man. Which means, what is it? So, they kept on pestering him for long enough, and he gave them what they pestered him for. Meat for a whole month. until they were absolutely sick of it. How many times have you had something that you really, really liked as a child and you think, when I grow up I'm going to eat as much of this as I want? And you do, and you get sick of it. Or if you work in a restaurant or something and you try all of their food, it's not such a big novelty after a month. By the end of the month, you go into other restaurants and you're swapping food with them. All the fast food people do that. They swap burgers for chicken and chicken for pizza, and they swap with each other because they're sick and tired of their own food. So why did he give them the meat in the end? Because of their rejection of him. And for distressing him. Did you know that Yahweh can get distressed? He has feelings. So many people, I just don't understand it, but they don't realise that he has feelings. He's a father. Fathers have feelings for their children. So they completely rejected him and distressed him with their whining cries of, why did we ever leave Egypt? And yet in complete stark contrast, after Yeshua had fasted for 40 days and nights, he was hungry. Again, he had natural things happen to him. He had feelings. He became hungry just like anybody else. And as usual at those times when we're the most vulnerable, the tempter came and said to him, if you are the Son of God, doing what he always does, dropping in that little seed of doubt. But he chose the wrong person. If you're the Son of God, order these stones to become bread. But he answered him, the Tanakh says, man doesn't live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of Yahweh. I find that fascinating, because he answers him with the word, and the word he uses basically proclaims that it's the word that comes from him that we live on, not the bread that you're tempting me to change him into. The difference between the two: unconditional trust and acceptance, which was displayed by his obedience, his relationship, and his character. And the question we need to ask ourselves today is, does our behaviour and character move people towards or away from Yahweh? Do our ideas and creations elevate or pollute humanity? Does what we say and do have Abba's hallmark of authenticity stamped clearly on it, just like a piece of silver? It has the hallmark on it. And people trust the hallmark. Does our unconditional ahava, or love for one another, and the authentic fruit of our daily lives clearly identify us as his Talmudim, his followers, his students? Does what we say and preach about, what we know, match up with what we actually do? Or are we still yearning for an easier life and complaining about the lack of variety in our spiritual diet? Wanting constant signs and wonders to comfort and reassure our childish immaturity. A kind of super-spiritual adrenaline rush. Signs and wonders are absolutely valid and necessary, but in balance. Because any truth taken to either extreme becomes heresy. Yes, it's a truth, but it's been taken to an extreme. And when it's taken to an extreme, it becomes heresy. An obscene caricature of the real thing. Of course, the promised inheritance was a land filled with milk and honey. But what people forget is the milk was from sheep and goats. And the honey was actually mostly made from dates, soaked and boiled into a syrup to become date honey. But once they got inside the land, a variety of cereals and fruits changed their diet dramatically. So a lot of them would have been very happy. No more manna burgers. There were 3 seasons that determined what was available. Starting with spring, when the barley ripened, because barley ripens quicker than wheat. Which is at Pesach. And then, around 6 weeks later, or 49 days later, at Shavuot, the wheat harvest comes in. And these formed the staple diet, with grain accounting for 50 to 70% of the average calorie intake. So once they got inside the land, 50 to 70% of their calorie intake came from bread, from wheat, from barley. So they must have got used to the cake-like man after all, because when they got there, they were still eating lots and lots of bread. And this Israel wheat was the world's first domesticated grain. Or just to be technical, a fruit. Wheat isn't just wheat, it's actually a fruit, Caryopsis. And this particular strain of wheat was called Emmer wheat, which today we call Durum wheat, which is used a lot to make pasta and stuff. But Emmer was the first cultivated strain of wheat. Where did it come from? The grass, which is why we read in Genesis about the grass. Because it was a couple of different grasses that came together that started wheat. Everything else, including spelt and all these other ancient grains that we hear about, actually came from that, not before that. Emmer wheat was the first cultivated grain crop. Where's it gone? So all these other hybrids, including spelt, came from other places, and they are hybrids of the original Emmer wheat. Spelt actually comes from Egypt. And these hybrids gradually developed and spread to other parts of the world. And this Emmer wheat was used to make uga, or flatbread, and challah, using the even finer ground flour. So when it talks about the fine flour, this was the flour that was ground even finer to use for ceremonial bread. But to make that bread, they used a small piece of old dough from the last batch to make it rise like sourdough for the ritual temple use. And they always kept a piece of old dough to use to cause it to rise, just like sourdough. It took about 3 hours a day for the women to grind enough grain and flour to feed a family of 5. So who thinks going to the supermarket's better? 3 hours a day just to grind enough by hand to make enough for a family of 5. And people now complain they haven't got enough time in the day. That's just the flour. Then you've still got to prepare it and bake it and knead it. And again, we always focus on the bread, but we forget roasted grain was also a major food source. Because it was portable and it stayed in good nick. As you read about there, they just picked the heads off and rubbed them with their hands and just ate them. In the summer, grapes were harvested and made into wine. And in the autumn, olives were used to make oil for making bread. The olive oil was used for making bread, for spreading on the bread, and for other purposes as well. That's how they made the matzah and the cakes. And it was also a fuel for the menorah flames. prepared in a different way for that use. Much of the fruit that was preserved to last, because it had to last all year. What happened at the harvest had to continue on till the following harvest. Grapes were made into raisins, figs were made into cakes, pomegranates into juice and syrup, and olives into oil. Veggies were not used much. Sorry, but they didn't eat many veggies. It was all grain, bread, and fruit. And even meat was only used on special occasions. They didn't have it for breakfast, lunch and dinner. But by the Second Temple period, barley went out of fashion and was used only for animals. And wheat reigned supreme. But none of this produce was available without a planting season. For every crop to be successful, it had to be planted at the right time. You can't reap something that hasn't been planted. Just as it is in our own lives. If it hasn't been planted, we can't reap it. Everybody focuses on the harvest, the exciting part. And they forget all about the digging, the planting and the tending part. The long, boring lack of action times. Everybody loves the harvest. But to have a harvest, you have to do something about it. Even more importantly, we need to be responsible and keep on doing it again and again and again. How boring. Once every now and again doing it just isn't good enough. Or just doing it when you feel like it isn't good enough. Or even expecting somebody else to do it for you isn't good enough. You will simply run out and starve the following year. If you don't plant at the right time, you won't reap at the right time. If you don't reap at the right time, you will have no food for the following year. Spiritually or physically. This is what people forget. They think, oh, I've got the gift now. But they forget they still need to plant. And they still need to get to the stage of being able to reap the fruit. We're talking about having fruit. You can't have fruit if you haven't planted. If you don't plant, you don't get the fruit. And if you don't get the fruit, you can't use it. You can't show it. Also, if we're really, really greedy and have a big festival and eat everything as soon as the harvest comes in, as it matures, and not store it and set it aside, enough for the whole year, we'll have the same result. So we have to be disciplined. When the harvest comes in, we have to preserve it to last for the whole year. As Jacob and a lot of other people will tell us, a farmer always plans ahead. Somebody who knows about planting and reaping, a gardener, a farmer, knows that you have to plan ahead. There's no use thinking, it's coming up in about 4 weeks' time, let me plant some seeds quick and have a harvest. It doesn't work that way. A good farmer, a good gardener always plans ahead and strictly follows a master plan. A regular monthly routine. Every month they look at their routine and it says, plant this, plant that, prune this, prune that, whatever. And it covers everything he needs to do each and every month of the year. And then finally he moves on to the harvest time. And usually you're trying to beat the weather. When harvest time comes, the attacks come. Whether it's frosts or rain or storms or whatever, the enemy will always try and take out the harvest. So you need to keep an eye on the weather. You need to listen to your wife who knows when the enemy's trying to strike and warns you ahead of time because she's got her radar on. The radar on says, warning, warning. And the guy turns around and says, right, I need a strategy and I need to do something about this. If he listens to it. Like I said, so many women in here got a lot of us guys out of a lot of trouble because they listened and they had their radar on, and we didn't because we haven't got any. So he moves on to harvesting. Then he has to move on to threshing and grinding and sifting and mixing and kneading and proving and baking every single day, day in and day out. You imagine how tough that was for them, where they used to just go down and find the stuff on the ground and just cooking it and eating it. Suddenly they have to do all this. They're back to the sweat of the brow thing like Adam. And every single day all these things have to take place, or you won't have food for the day. Boring, yes, but essential, yes. And Abba also adds another dimension to the mix by telling us that we don't live by bread alone. Because bread is just a food that sustains us physically. But by every word that comes from the mouth of Yahweh. And when I wrote that, I had this mental picture of a baby bird in the nest, waiting to be fed. But you have to be in the nest to get fed. So every word that comes from the mouth of Yahweh, the parent bird, comes to the nest, it has whatever, insects, worms, whatever in its mouth, and it literally feeds the baby birds mouth to mouth. We need to be close enough to see Him, hear Him, and be able to receive from Him every day as He helps us to mature, to grow strong, and eventually to be able to fly higher and faster. Does our body need feeding on a regular basis? Yes. But so does our spirit. There has to be a balance between the two. Neglect either one of them and you will grow weak and eventually perish, physically or spiritually. The instruction in His Word to both ask for and thank Him for our daily bread is the key to receiving both. We don't just ask, we thank. One of the early lessons I learned was to thank Him in advance for what He was going to do for me. To thank Him in advance for what He was going to give me. I didn't turn around and say, oh please, please, I need this. Please, please, I need that. I just turned and said, thank you for the food you're going to provide today. Why? Because I trust Him. And I knew He would provide me with the food. So I thanked Him for it. I didn't just take it for granted. And I still do. Just like the man, what is it? We can only collect enough for each day. Except, of course, for Shabbat. And on Shabbat, we can collect a double portion. The trouble is, if we collect a double portion on Shabbat and we get greedy, what do we eat for the next day? It's for the Friday and for the Saturday. Again, it's that same thing, teaching us to take what He gives us, but spread it between the two, to make sure that there's enough for both days. It's a double portion, it's a blessing. So we need to keep half for Friday and half for the Saturday. What we cannot do is collect 7 days worth on Shabbat to last all week. So many people think that they can come on Shabbat or on the Sunday or whatever and collect enough to last them all week. The trouble is, by the Monday or Tuesday, they've run out. And they're great. It's like you pump something up. And they come along and you pump them all up, and then they go away and slowly it's all... By the end of the week they're completely flat and have to come for another pump up. No. You cannot collect enough on Shabbat for a whole week. spiritual man, just like the physical man, is designed with a strict use-by date. And the use-by date is 24 hours only. Why was it designed like that? So that you have to go back to the source for more. Just like the virgins, if your oil runs out, your light runs out. And you can only get the oil on a daily basis. The oil is only designed to last for 24 hours. And then you have to go back for more. And you can only replenish it from one place, from the source. So today's Shavuot is harvest season. And Abba's word to you today is to make sure that you are fully equipped and fully prepared to reap and bring the grain into the storehouse. And to make sure that there is food to sustain you. And also to share with those in need who don't yet understand the perfectly balanced kingdom principle. It's called the enough principle. And the enough principle is about not having too much or having too little, but just enough for our daily needs. You remember when they gathered the man? Those that tried to gather too much, those that tried to gather too little, they all finished up with the same. And anybody that tried to store it up for the next day to sell it, it had rotted. The enough principle is don't ask for too much, don't ask for too little, ask for enough. And sometimes He'll give you enough for you, and sometimes He'll give you enough for you and others. And the reason He'll do that is so you can share it, because they don't understand the principle yet. So Shalom, Meshulav Kotzer, combine harvesters. Shalom. I had this vision years ago.